Picture this. A vibrant, booming city, a real powerhouse on the West Coast, suddenly just thrown into chaos in seconds.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. April 18th, 1906, San Francisco.
Ripped apart by that massive earthquake. So today on the Deep Dive, we're going to unpack this pivotal event.
Right. Sifting through everything from, personal accounts.
Eyewitness stuff, yeah, right up to the modern geological science.
To detailed analysis.
Exactly. And our goal, it's to understand the core of this catastrophe, the ground shaking, the aftermath, its long shadow.
Well, without getting totally bogged down in, super technical jargon.
Right. Let's get into it.
It's truly astonishing when you look at the sheer force. 5:12 a.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Just imagine being woken up by that.
The Earth under Northern California just fractured. The estimated moment magnitude, that's the scale we use now for the big ones.
Yeah, it gives a better picture than Richter for these huge events.
Exactly. It's around 7.9. Could be anywhere from 7.7 to maybe 8.3, some say, but 7.9 is the common figure.
And that shaking, it wasn't just in San Francisco, was it? It spread out.
Oh, way out. Intensely felt from Eureka way down to the Salinas Valley. Big area.
And when you say intense,
yeah,
we're talking serious damage potential, like enough to bring down buildings.
Definitely. The Mercalli intensity scale, which measures the effects you see.
Right, what people felt, what happened to structures.
It hit XI, that's extreme. In San Francisco and places like Santa Rosa up north, too.
Okay, XI. What does extreme actually look like on the ground, beyond just buildings collapsing?
Well, at XI, you'd see large cracks opening in the ground, big fissures,
wow,
significant landslides, and near total destruction. Even really well-built structures wouldn't stand much chance.
Bridges, too. Underground pipes.
Bridges could definitely collapse. Underground pipes completely shattered. It's devastation. There's very little standing.
So where did this monster actually start, the epicenter?
Well, the initial thought for a long time actually was near Olima, that's in Marin County, just north of the city. But more recent analysis, looking at all the data again, it strongly suggests it was offshore.
Offshore of San Francisco itself.
Yeah. And one really compelling piece of evidence for that is this small, localized tsunami.
Tsunami? I didn't realize there was one.
It wasn't huge, only about 3 inches high, recorded at the San Francisco Presidio.
Tiny.
Tiny, yeah. But the cycle was like 45 minutes. Its very existence points to an underwater disturbance right near the city. Supports the offshore idea.
Makes sense. So the geological engine behind this got to be the San Andreas Fault.
Precisely. The infamous San Andreas. It's a classic example of a continental transform fault.
Okay, transform fault. Remind us what that means.
Think of it like a massive crack in the Earth's crust. You've got 2 huge plates.
The Pacific Plate and the North American Plate.
Right. And they're sliding past each other horizontally. In this case, the Pacific Plate is moving kind of northwest.
Relative to the North American Plate.
Right.
What they call right lateral motion.
Exactly. And this fault, it's huge. Stretches about 800 miles through California.
And this 1906 event, it wasn't just a tiny slip along that fault. It was a major rupture.
Oh, absolutely massive. Based on triangulation data that's measuring how the ground actually shifted, they estimate the fault ruptured for about 310 miles, 500 kilometers.
310 miles. That's enormous.
It is. And it's interesting because the initial seismograph readings, the squiggly lines, they suggested a shorter rupture.
So why the difference?
It might be explained by something called super shear propagation.
Super shear. Sounds fast.
It is. Basically, the rupture tearing along the fault was so fast in some sections.
Faster than the seismic waves it was creating.
Potentially, yeah. It outpaced some of the waves.
Yeah.
And that could actually explain why the shaking felt so intense in certain areas.
And how much did the ground actually move?
The maximum observed surface shift was around 20 feet, but some measurements suggest maybe even 28 feet in spots.
28 feet sideways. Unbelievable.
Yeah. And here's something else. There was apparently a foreshock.
A warning tremor.
It seems so. About 20 to 25 seconds before the main shock hit. A pretty strong one, apparently.
Imagine feeling that and then, bam.
And then that main shaking, it just went on for about 42 seconds.
42 seconds of that kind of violent shaking. Just terrifying.
Almost impossible to really comprehend. And like we said, the effects weren't just local.
Right. Felt way up in Oregon.
Down to Los Angeles and even inland, central Nevada.
Wow. And I read that the type of ground really mattered, too.
Critically important. If you were on areas built on, say, sediment-filled valleys or Old Bay fill.
Less stable ground.
Much less stable. You experienced much stronger shaking. There's a process called soil liquefaction.
Liquefaction. That's where the ground kind of turns to liquid, right? Loses its strength.
Exactly. It behaves like a fluid. Really amplifies the shaking. Makes you think about where we build cities, doesn't it?
It really does. What about aftershocks? You usually expect a lot after a big one.
You do. But interestingly, the 1906 quake had fewer than expected.
Really?
Not entirely sure, but most of the ones that did happen were clustered at the ends of that long rupture zone.
Northern and southern ends.
Yeah, or on other nearby faults, like the Hayward Fault across the bay.
Any big ones?
The largest was actually about 3 years later, near Eureka, a magnitude 6.7. Still significant.
A reminder that things were still settling.
Definitely. And there were even some remotely triggered events, like an earthquake swarm way down in the Imperial Valley.
Wow, far away.
And another quake under Santa Monica Bay. Shows how a huge rupture like this can stress faults far beyond the main break.
So the shaking itself was obviously catastrophic, but that wasn't the end of it, was it? The fires.
The fires. They were arguably the bigger disaster for the city itself.
Responsible for most of the destruction.
Estimates vary, but yeah, somewhere between 80% and maybe even over 95% of the total property loss.
95%. That's staggering.
The earthquake did immense damage, no question. Broke buildings, infrastructure.
But the fire just finished the job.
It did. A relentless inferno that burned for 4 days and nights. Reduced huge swaths of the city just to ashes.
What started them all? Was it just random sparks?
The main cause seems to have been ruptured gas mains, underground pipes broken by the shaking.
Leaking gas everywhere.
Exactly. Over 30 separate fires ignited almost immediately. And then, tragically, attempts to create fire breaks using dynamite.
Trying to stop the spread by blowing buildings up.
Right, but often done by firefighters, even soldiers who weren't really trained for it.
And it backfired.
Spectacularly in some cases. Instead of containing the fire, the explosion sometimes just spread embers and started new fires.
Oh, man. A nightmare scenario. I read about one particularly bad fire, the ham and eggs fire.
Ah, yes. That one's notorious. Started pretty innocently, actually, in Hayes Valley. A woman went to cook breakfast on her stove.
Okay.
But her chimney had been damaged by the quake. She didn't realize it.
Oh, no.
That one simple act, lighting the stove, sparked a fire. And it just took off.
How bad did it get?
It ultimately destroyed a huge area, something like 30 square blocks. Took out a college, the Hall of Records, even the old City Hall.
All from one damaged chimney. Shows how vulnerable everything was.
Absolutely. A devastating chain reaction.
And then there was the whole insurance situation. That sounds messy.
Very messy. Most insurance policies back then covered fire damage.
But not earthquake damage.
Exactly. They specifically excluded it. So if your building was wrecked by the shaking, you were out of luck.
But if it burned down afterwards?
You might be covered. Which led to some really desperate and frankly grim situations.
What do you mean?
Well, there are reports, even from Army officers at the time, of property owners deliberately setting fire to their own damaged buildings.
Seriously, arson.
To try and claim the fire insurance. A Captain Wildman recounted a fireman telling him people were doing it because they thought it was the only way to recover anything financially.
Yeah, that's wow. Just shows the level of desperation. And the cultural losses in those fires must have been huge. The Palace Hotel.
Oh, the Palace Hotel. A true landmark. Gone. Enrico Caruso, the famous opera singer, was staying there.
Right. He just performed Carmen the night before.
Woken by the quake, terrified. He supposedly vowed never to return to San Francisco.
Can't blame him. And the opera company lost everything.
The whole Metropolitan Opera Touring Company lost all their sets, their costumes. A huge blow.
And not just hotels. What about places like the California Academy of Sciences?
A huge loss there, too. Most of their massive botanical collection was destroyed.
Ah, terrible.
But there's a bit of a silver lining. The botany curator, Alice Eastwood, showed incredible foresight. She managed to save nearly 1,500 really valuable plant specimens, got them out just before the building was consumed.
Wow. Heroic. But other things were lost forever.
Yes. Things like the original California state flag, the bear flag, lost in the fire.
And it hit scientific research, too.
Absolutely. A biochemist named Benjamin R. Jacobs doing important work on food nutrition. His entire lab, all his research records completely destroyed. A major setback for his work.
Just layers upon layers of loss. Okay, let's shift focus a bit. What about the immediate human cost? The death toll.
That's a really difficult figure to pin down even today. Initial counts were way too low.
Why was that?
Partly chaos, partly maybe deliberate downplaying, but also really poor tracking, especially in Chinatown.
So the early estimates of a few hundred were wrong.
Definitely wrong. In 2005, the city officially revised the number, acknowledging over 3,000 deaths.
3,000? That's a huge number.
It is, and the vast majority were in San Francisco itself, but places like Santa Rosa, San Jose, they lost people too.
And the number of people left homeless?
Just staggering, somewhere between 227,000 and 300,000 people.
Out of a population of what, around 410,000?
Yeah. So well over half the city's population was suddenly homeless.
Where did they all go?
Makeshift tent cities sprang up instantly. Golden Gate Park, the Presidio military base, even out on the beaches.
Living in tents.
For a long time, too. Some of those refugee camps lasted for more than 2 years while the city struggled to rebuild.
Faced with that scale of disaster, the immediate response must have been critical. The military got involved quickly, right?
Yes, federal troops under General Funston mobilized rapidly. Their first jobs were trying to prevent looting.
And helping with that dynamiting we talked about.
Right, which had mixed results. But they were also crucial for aid. Distributing food, setting up shelters, providing clothing.
How many troops?
Over 4,000 federal troops involved in that initial emergency phase. Essential support.
But there was also that controversial shoot-to-kill order from the mayor.
Mayor Schmitz, yeah. Faced with reports of widespread looting, general lawlessness in the chaos.
Authorized lethal force.
He did. For federal troops, police, and even newly deputized special police, anyone caught looting or committing other major crimes could be shot on sight.
Very drastic measure.
Reflects the desperation, I suppose. But interestingly, there were also accusations that some soldiers themselves were involved in looting. Shows the breakdown of order.
And the property damage, financially speaking. We said 80-95% was fire, but the total cost.
Astronomical. Estimates back then were over $400 million in 1906 dollars.
Which today would be billions.
Easily over $10 billion in today's money. Just the insured losses were around $235 million back then. That's nearly $6 billion today. Gives you a sense of the financial hit.
It's almost impossible to imagine starting over after that. I know some city leaders initially tried to kind of downplay it.
Yeah, there was definitely an effort by some political and business figures to manage the narrative.
Why? Fear of scaring off investment.
That was a big part of it. Concern about the city's future, its reputation. Governor Pardee's first public statement focused entirely on rebuilding, didn't even mention the earthquake.
Wow.
And there were reports of them deliberately lowballing the fatality numbers, the damage estimates, trying to project resilience, minimize the scale.
But despite that, the actual rebuilding effort seems to have started incredibly quickly. The spirit must have been strong.
It seems so. Even with banks initially shut, their vaults were too hot to open from the fires.
Right. Couldn't get money out.
The Bank of Italy, which later became Bank of America, played a huge role.
How so?
Its president, Giannini, had managed to get the bank's funds out before the fire hit. He set up shop on the docks almost immediately.
Providing cash.
Providing crucial liquidity when no one else could. He also quickly chartered ships to bring lumber down from the Pacific Northwest. Knew they need building materials fast.
Smart. Now, I remember reading about a really ambitious plan for redesigning the city by Daniel Burnham.
Ah, Burnham's plan. Yes, very grand, very forward-thinking.
What did it involve?
Think big, sweeping avenues like Paris, a huge neoclassical civic center, massive parks, a complete reimagining.
That sounds amazing. Why did it happen?
Mostly resistance from property owners and real estate interests. They didn't want to sell the large amounts of land needed. Plus, the urgency was just to rebuild fast, not necessarily perfectly.
Shame. Does any of his ideas make it through?
Some did, eventually. The civic center we have today owes a lot to his vision. Wider streets like Van Ness Avenue, better access to Fisherman's Wharf, echoes of Burnham's ideas.
Interesting. What about Chinatown? I heard there were attempts to move it.
Yes, some city officials definitely wanted to relocate the Chinese population to the outskirts. Hunters Point was mentioned.
But they resisted.
Strongly and successfully. They rebuilt Chinatown right where it was, although with a more westernized, almost tourist-friendly architectural style demanded by the city leaders.
And there was an ironic twist with citizenship records.
A major one. The fire destroyed City Hall and the Hall of Records. This wiped out documentation.
Which meant thousands of Chinese immigrants, previously barred from citizenship by the Exclusion Act,
could now claim they were born in San Francisco and their records were lost. It led to a huge wave of legal immigration, changing the community's demographics.
Wow. Unintended consequences. And the quake shifted where the wealthy lived too. Nob Hill got hit hard.
Very hard. Many of the grand mansions there were destroyed, so a lot of wealthy families looked west towards Pacific Heights.
Why there?
Land was cheaper, less developed, and crucially, it hadn't burned as badly, so they rebuilt their mansions out there, changed the social geography of the city.
It's still amazing how quickly they rebuilt overall. By 1915, just 9 years later, they're hosting a World's Fair.
The Panama Pacific International Exposition, a huge statement to the world. We're back.
And the Army helped with housing immediately after, right? Those little cottages.
Relief houses, yeah. Over 5,600 of them built by the Army.
Wow.
Simple little redwood and fir cottages.
Put that out cheap.
Very cheap, like $2 a month to displaced families. And incredibly, hundreds still exist today.
No way, those little houses.
Yep, dotted around the city. Now they're highly valued properties. A direct physical link back to 1906.
That's incredible. Living history. Did the fire change how land was used long term?
Apparently so. A study a few years back found that in the areas that burned, there was a long-term shift towards more non-residential land use. Businesses, commercial properties.
Why?
The destruction essentially wiped the slate clean. Before, older houses might have prevented that kind of change, but the fire opened up possibilities for reshaping the landscape.
And the world chipped in to help, right? Relief funds.
Absolutely.
Right.
Aid poured in from all over the U.S. and around the globe. Over $5 million in 1906 dollars, which was a huge sum then.
That must have made a difference. But the insurance payout was complicated.
Very. Huge payouts led to some insurance companies going bankrupt. Others, like Lloyd's of London and companies from Hartford, famously paid out in full on their fire policies.
That must have shaken the financial world.
It did. It's actually seen as a contributing factor to the financial panic of 1907. So much capital flowed out to pay claims.
And it led to changes in insurance law. Or discussions, at least.
Big discussions globally. Should earthquake risk be excluded from fire policies everywhere?
What did California decide?
Ultimately, California did not adopt that exclusion. Insurers there remained on the hook for fires following earthquakes, a decision with long-lasting consequences.
It's quite moving to think about the centennial in 2006. Were there still survivors then?
There were. 11 survivors actually attended the commemoration events.
Amazing.
The last known survivor, William Del Monte, passed away in 2016. He was nearly 110, living links to that history.
And this disaster, it was kind of a landmark for documentation too, wasn't it? First time using new technology.
Absolutely. It was really the first major natural disaster to be extensively documented with photography and even early motion picture footage.
Capturing the devastation visually.
The work of photographers like Willard Worden is invaluable, and you have iconic images like the portals of the past.
Those columns standing alone in Golden Gate Park.
Yeah. The remnants of a Nob Hill mansion became a powerful symbol of both destruction and survival.
Scientifically, it was a huge catalyst.
Massive. Really spurred the development of seismology as a modern science.
Yeah.
Provided so much data, highlighted the need to understand earthquakes better.
And it impacted institutions, too.
Yeah.
Like hospitals.
Yeah, the emergency response highlighted needs and spurred the development of medical facilities, like at UCSF.
You know, reading accounts from the time, like from William James or H.G. Wells, they both commented on the attitude of the survivors. Not despair, but the sort of positive energy, resilience.
It's remarkable. They observed a distinct lack of dismay, a focus on rebuilding, almost a strange kind of optimism amidst the ruins.
Speaks volumes about the human spirit, I guess.
It really does. That determination to just get on with it, restore their city.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have. The sheer power of the quake itself.
The San Andreas letting loose, then the overwhelming destruction from the fires that followed.
Yeah. Arguably worse than the shaking in terms of property loss.
The immediate human cost, the deaths, the homelessness, the response, both the good and the controversial.
And the long, long process of rebuilding, reshaping the city physically and socially.
Plus the lasting impacts on insurance, on science, on the city's identity.
So it leaves you with a pretty big question to think about, doesn't it?
Which is?
If something like this, a magnitude 7.9 on the San Andreas right by the city, happened today, how would it unfold? We have better building codes, more technology, advanced warning systems maybe.
But also a much denser population, more complex infrastructure, different vulnerabilities.
Exactly. How would modern San Francisco cope compared to 1906? What lessons from back then are still absolutely critical for us now?
That's definitely something to chew on. Really powerful points.
Food for thought.
For sure. And if you listening want to explore any of this further, we really encourage you to check out the sources. There's so much more detail, incredible firsthand stories out there.
Definitely worth digging deeper.